he's also the best bowler we've ever seen to left-handers, right? Like, he ended. Was it Steve Harmison? Is that the guy I'm thinking of from South Africa who came in to play a Test series against India and literally could not hit him? I think he goes out like 4 times in 15 balls or whatever, and like got dropped, and it kind of ruined his career, right? And it's like, well, if you're dropping a left-hander because they failed against Ashwin, you've made a huge error here. I can't remember if it was Steve Harmison or whoever it was, but I remember it was a left-handed South African. And we saw that again and again. We saw left-handers just like play good cricket against everyone else and then completely not know what to do against him. So perhaps the best player against left-handers we've ever seen, perhaps the best user of DRS we've ever seen, as in, Graham Swan was probably the guy that sort of taught finger spinners how to use DRS and how to bowl better for it. And Ashwin took those learnings and just took them to a completely different level. But also, like, for me, it's the thinking stuff, right? Like, moving out the way of a ball in an India-Pakistan game to cheat a wide, right? Do you remember that time? And I know I was commentating on this series, but I can't remember who it might have been against New Zealand, when he started bowling around the wicket to a right-hander, but then running across so he was over the wicket, so he's running in front of the umpire.
Yes. He has tried so many things like that, yeah.
And I remember the umpire saying to him, you can't do that. And him go, well, wait a minute, what am I doing here that is against the laws or the playing conditions? And like, he's showing the umpire, like, almost like his engineering brain coming in of going, well, no, because here's the bit I'm not allowed to run on. I ran inside this bit.
Yeah.
And the umpire's like, yeah, but I have to see. And he's like, yeah, but I'm willing for you to not have as good a line of sight on the LBWs. Just stuff like that. And, the Mankad stuff of, like, he's done more for what I think is the best way of thinking about Mankads, which is quite simply, if you do not want to be run out, don't leave your crease before I bowl the ball, right? Yes. And he's done it in quite I know occasionally he's been passionate about it, but he's done it in quite a reasonable way. He's like, he took it away from the whole, this isn't the right kind of cricket, and went, no, let's look at this logically. Any other time on the field, you would be run out. Why are we not going to run you out here? And you go through all these different things. And, I've got some friends who are, sort of high-end nerds when it comes to finger spin, right? And, really smart people. And they will talk about the stuff of, him being able to spin the ball, square, right? And then understand the sort of normal angle, then the top spin angle, and then also being able to do it the other way. Like, he can essentially spin the off spinner in 4 different ways, understanding why he is doing it, right? And then using it at the right time. And then on top of that brain is the athleticism he has through his hands and his wrist and his arms. And we focus on the fact he's, let's be honest, Saurabh, not the world's greatest athlete in other ways. Like, he's not going to win you a 100-meter dash, is he? But athletically, through his hands and his dexterity, we're talking about a Shane Warne, level athlete in those sorts of parts of his body. And you're putting that together with this supercomputer brain. Just for me, he's just such a fascinating cricketer all the way through. And I never felt with him. I felt, if anything, with him, sometimes I just wanted him to come in and bowl normal off spin, because he's so good at normal off spin, but he couldn't help himself. He's like, I'm going to try this now. That's not working. I'm going to do this. And it's like, dude, just bowl off spin for 10 minutes. You got to get this guy out. But he couldn't, because his brain was just processing the game at a freakish speed.
I think, he was definitely... I saw a show that you had done with Bumble for talkSPORT about who is the 3rd greatest spinner. I think one line into the show, when you said who's the 3rd greatest spinner, I was like, Ashwin. It has to be Ashwin. And I think that's where you eventually landed anyway. Even though Kumble was also obviously a great bowler and he has more wickets, but just the kind of things Ashwin could do as a finger spinner. We spoke about how Kohli was very Ponting-like. I always thought the Kohli-Ashwin combined in India especially was a Ponting-Wand thing. It was not a Tendulkar-Kumble succession, but it was more like in the Ponting-Wand mode, because Tendulkar-Kumble didn't win as many matches. They played in a weaker team, of course. And Kohli and Ashwin were for large parts the best test team in the best test team of their generation, and they won a whole lot of matches everywhere. And Ashwin, that thing you told me about running across, it reminds me, It was a Asia Cup ODI tournament in Bangladesh, and I had got a visa pretty late, so I landed up midway through the first game. India were bowling, and I suddenly see Ashwin bowling with long sleeves with a Sunil Narayan action, and that was just everyone was like, "What's happening here?" And then he came later and he said, "No, I mean people are allowed to do it, right? Because there is a bowler who's doing it. So I thought I'll also try and see, whether I can get more out of it." So how many bowlers can you think of who will change their? He's Steve Smithing bowling. He's changing his action in the middle of a game.
I remember in the IPL one year, and I can't remember how far back this was, when he basically just started bowling leg spin more than off spin in 1 year. And and you just watching it, and it was like the commentators were like, I was going crazy going, this has never happened before. We've never had, we've had Garfield Sobers and Sachin Tendulkar, but they're both batters, right?
Yeah.
This is a guy again, being paid a lot of money to bowl off spin, just going, do you know what? I think leg spin is the better option, and I'm going to focus on my leg spin here. And it's like he just kept doing that. Remember, he did a podcast, with Subhash Jayaraman years ago, where he just sort of casually says, T20 cricket is about a well-constructed 6 bad balls, right?
Yeah.
And people went nuts at that, and they didn't understand what he was saying. I think at the time, I understood the general principle more than most, but even I was just like, well, it's not, is it? Because if you bowl 3 good balls and everything else. But what he was trying to say is keeping the batter guessing and not understanding what is coming next is more important in T20 bowling than anything else. And that was for me, it's all those sorts of things where you look at what he does. It's easy to be the smart guy, right? Ashwin is not the first smart cricketer we have ever had, right? Mm-hmm. We've had people like, Stephen Fleming and Jeremy Coney and Mike Brearley who've done weird things, right? You go through the history of cricket, you have, Javed Miandad and George Headley and all these different guys who are willing to, go paint around the lines a little bit. But the deconstruction that Ashwin would have of the thing he did well is at a level that I don't think we've ever seen a player as good as him have the courage and the consistency to be able to do that. But also, this isn't like some guy who's stroking his chin as an intellectual, like John Inverarity or something, going, maybe cricket could be played, with 1 arm rather than 2 arms or something. Do you know what I mean? This is someone who literally was really competitive. Can I tell you the weirdest story about Ashwin? Right?
Absolutely, you have to.
In 2009, I'm pretty sure it was 2009. I have to go check my dates. I was on holiday in Sri Lanka. Right, and we did a whole tour of the country, and we went through Dambulla, and when we were in Dambulla, it happened to be that there was a tri-series. India was playing, Sri Lanka was playing, and New Zealand were playing. And we rock up to the hotel, and as we get out the car, I look at my wife, and I was just like, "That's Mitchell McClenaghan, right?" I think it was Mitchell McClenaghan, but it was a Kiwi cricketer, right? That's Ross Taylor. And then we realised we somehow, and I'm just on holiday. It's not like I'm there for the cricket. We somehow managed to book ourselves into the exact same hotel as all the players. It's a big fancy hotel, beautiful hotel. I've forgotten the name of it now. Sorry to the hoteliers. And they had fancy infinity pools out the front, and then out the back they had the pools for the kids and the splashing and everything. Right? No, sorry, Stephen. I meant to press mute and I missed it. And so I head out to the back pool to do some swimming laps. And I'm doing some swimming for about 5 minutes. It's about a 15-minute pool, so it's not quite long enough, but just long enough to do laps in. And after a little while, I realized someone else has come in, and they're trying to swim with me, right? And, I'm Australian and quite competitive, and I was like, who's this dude? So I start, and I was a squad swimmer, right? I'm Australian. We swim competitively, right? So I start swimming competitively because I'm used to people doing that in a swimming pool and going, no, mate. And I get faster and faster. And this person just keeps trying to catch up with me, right? And I'm hammering it by the end. And I can feel this person who clearly is nowhere near the level of swimmer of me, but is trying as hard as possible to catch up to me. And when we finish, we sort of get to the end of, it must have been about 10 or 15 minutes of pretty hardcore swimming. I get to the end and I stop, and this person stops next to me and sort of looks over and nods at me. And I'm like, and he was really young, but it was Ashwin. And he clearly was not a great swimmer, but he was trying to push himself as far as possible with some random guy in a pool. And it's one of those things of that's why I go that the whole intellectual side of things, there's actually a bit of a fierce competitive dog within him that we've seen time and time again in international cricket, right? Like when something doesn't go his way, he gets really fiery and passionate. It's not just that cricket is an intellectual folly for him, right? He's using his smarts because he hates to lose. Right. And you saw that in that one moment, and you see it in many when he's out on the field, right? Like there is a real fire that burns within him. So it's not just that he's incredibly talented and that he's incredibly smart. He was a dog as well.
Yeah, he was hyper competitive, which is why also I think, this whole notion we have of players who need to retire on a high, retire when people are asking why rather than why not, I think is very misplaced. These guys are elite, athletes who have come to the top of their profession by scrambling over the heads of all the others. And in a country like India, where there is 50 million guys who want to be cricketers, you have to be good enough to be amongst 15 or 20. And you have spent that time, your life doing that, your life being better than them and believing that you're better than them. It's not easy to just switch off and say that, okay, maybe I'm not as good. It's a whole... the switch in thinking. It's not just a switch you flick on and off, which is why also, great props to him, because I think he probably could have. He said also, I think I have a bit of punch left in me, but the next guys are ready, so I think it's the right time to move. Like, not many people do that. I think they go after they've had a poor time of it. And we have not even talked about his batting.
We haven't talked about his batting. We'll get to that in a moment. But I think there's also... depending on how much he wanted to play, he could have done what England should have done with Jimmy Anderson, which is they just kept including him in squads for the next couple of years. And maybe occasionally if they went to like West Indies or, somewhere else and they weren't going to use him, they said, you have those off, but keep including him in squads. And then when you need him, you bring him back in. He's skillful enough. He will keep his mind sharp. He'll probably still play IPL for a little while as well. So I don't think they have to worry about that. So there was another option where for 2 or 3 more years, you could have kept him around. But I think, again, to get back to what we were saying before, he was used to being the best player in the world. Like, I mean, he's got so many Man of the Series awards, right? And Man of the Match awards that I think there's an element of like, he would have weighed that up. He would have, maybe Gautam Gambhir is the wrong coach for this, but certainly when Jarrod was around, I think he could have had that conversation of just being like, look, use everyone else, but when it's a big test, if you're not feeling the other guys, let me come back in, or let me play as the third spinner when you need the third spinner to come in. And maybe he just didn't want to do that, but it's a bit of a shame because I think that one bad series in New Zealand to me was not the sign that he was finished. It was the sign that that he was towards the down, right? Like he might have had a moment where he struggled, but I didn't think, that meant he was done, because he was awesome in the series right before that against Bangladesh, right? Player of the series against Bangladesh, was he, I think, in that one again? If not, he should have been.
At least a player of the match in one. Either he or Jadeja were player of the series. I'm forgetting.
So it's not as if that New Zealand series said he was done, but at the same time, whether he would have been able to get to the heights he had as consistently, he probably needed more rest in the future, but he's chosen the other option as well, which, you've got to respect that. The batting is interesting because I would say him and Stuart Broad are two of the more interesting cricketers in the world, right? And you might throw Steve Smith in that. And all three of them at different stages were not what they ended up in Test cricket, right? So Steve Smith was always a great batter when he was young, but had that period of which he had to think like a bowler. Right. Stuart Broad was a batter who bowled medium pace when he was first signed for Leicestershire, right? And Ashwin came through as a batter when he was younger. And those sorts of players are really fascinating because they think about the game holistically, whereas people who are specialists at 14 don't think about, they just do what they do because they're really preternaturally talented towards it. Whereas Ashwin, because of the batting, was always sort of thinking about the game from all different angles and all different viewpoints. And just talking about Ashwin's batting memories, I think
most people would have his century at Chennai as one of their favorite batting memories of Ashwin. I have that, but my other one is him retiring himself out in an IPL match so that Riyan Parag could come in and hit. Just the level of thinking that goes behind that, and the guts, that the gumption to pull it off. Like who retires themselves out when they're okay to bat? Everybody wants more runs, more. But he had that thinking at that time also. Last year, I think he did it. He just retired out. There was 1 over left. He had been promoted up the order by Rajasthan, who used to do that with him a little bit, to stall a collapse or something. So he felt like he had done his job. And in that 1 over, Riyan Parag could get more runs than he could. And this was Riyan Parag last year. See, this year, Riyan Parag had a fantastic season. Whereas last year, before, he was not. Yeah. So he was thinking in those terms, even when Riyan Parag was not known to the rest of the world as a big hitter. That just shows, I mean, it's just we can go on about Ashwin, sidetracks for the whole podcast and the next one. It's
but I think he kind of is a player of. I suppose I want to sum him up this way. He's kind of one of us, right? And so I remember a couple of years.
Yeah.
Hey.
A cricket nerd type, like a guy who's
but I mean specifically an online cricket nerd, right? In a way that Mike Hussey wasn't. Like, people have been cricket nerds before. I don't want to make it sound like not all cricketers are obsessed by cricket, right? Like, there are plenty that aren't, but there are a small percentage who really are. The difference is that he's an online cricket nerd. I remember talking to this kid who had done a bunch of like graphic, illustrations of cricket stuff. And I was chatting to him, and he said, Ashwin got in touch. Now, this guy at this stage probably had about 120 followers on social media, right? And somehow Ash had found him, right? And got in touch with him to say, I really like what you're doing, keep going, blah, blah, blah. And I think they might have used one of his graphics in one of Ashwin's YouTube videos eventually as well. Wow. And he was always like that, right? Like, it was constantly that sort of stuff of, having those sorts of conversations with people, of seeking people out, of also giving voice to analysis, right? Like, his podcast is, it's part Draymond Green and part JJ Redick, if you're an NBA fan, in that it's the opinionated player saying the things that they believe, but there's also that whole other side of it, of proper analysis and explaining how these things go. Yeah. Like, this is a guy that has read almost every article ever written on, Cricinfo back in the day. Like, you can see, he's like, our friend Sid Monga come to life, but with talent, bowling talent, I should say. Sorry, Sid, not writing talent. Yeah, plenty of writing talent. But do you know what I mean? It feels like an old school Cricinfo writer who happens to be great at cricket. And he's kind of used all that sort of stuff, like the video and the analysis and, talking to Himanesh, the Indian analyst. I think him and Ashwin had a relationship before he got that job. Yeah. And so, and I know he's had a look at my stuff before, and Prasanna, who was the South African analyst, he's now on Ash's podcast, right? Like, he's really heavily into that sort of, the physics of cricket and the analytics of cricket and everything else. And then you watch him on the field, and it's like watching one of us play a cricket video game, right? Like, there's an element of, he's like us playing international cricket captain, but in real life, where he's using all of that stuff, all of that time trolling through Twitter, looking at YouTube videos and everything else, actually out in the middle when he is. Sometimes it's, as I said, sometimes it might be circumnavigating the normalities of cricket, but other times it's just trying to get the exact kind of rotation that he wants, or the proper way to hide a delivery, or whatever that may be. Like, it really is, he's a cricketer unlike anyone else for that specific reason. And so, there's a whole generation of people that have kind of cottoned onto him as their icon, not just because he's good at cricket, but because of all of these other things, right? Like, to me, he represents more than just like, Harbhajan was a really good finger spinner, right? No one's ever going to take that away from him. Ashwin is just on a different level in the way that he connects with this whole generation of cricket followers who now are on Cricket Reddit, right? That, you know, they're putting their stuff up on Twitter or on Blue Sky or whatever it may be. They had their own Medium posts back in the day. They've got a Substack. He's basically all of them together but at the very best, at the top level. I don't think for people like us, he's the totem, really, of that thinking. And, you know, he's really the child of online cricket media.